Blood spilled across polished floors. 13 slaveholders lay dead beneath the glow of chandeliers meant for celebration. What kind of night could turn a plantation ball into a massacre? How did music, laughter, and silk dresses drown into screams and blood? In the heart of Savannah, secrets too heavy to carry erupted with violent justice. But was it revenge, or was it freedom demanding its due? Behind every strike, there were years of humiliation, cruelty, and silent rage waiting to ignite. Tonight, you will uncover what history tried to bury, details that still echo in the South's haunted memory. Stay with us until the very end, because the revelations may shock you more than the violence itself. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments from which city you're watching. Her name was Clara, though few dared to speak it aloud on the plantation. To most, she was only the girl from the fields, another shadow bent beneath the cotton sun. But within the quarters, Clara's presence carried weight. She was strong in body and sharp in mind, trusted by others who lived under the same chains. She knew how to mend wounds with herbs found along the marshes, how to patch torn garments with steady hands, and how to calm crying children when the whips cracked too close. In a place where survival was the only measure of worth, Clara had become more than a worker. She was a quiet pillar of hope. By day, she moved swiftly between rows, her back aching, her hands hardened, her face unreadable. She learned early to keep her eyes lowered, to swallow her words before they ever left her lips. Silence was its own shield, but even in that silence, she absorbed everything. The careless cruelty of the masters, the hushed whispers of overseers drunk on their own authority, the broken prayers of her people whispered under the night sky. Clara carried it all inside, letting none of it show, as though she were only another weary figure under the weight of the South. Yet her spirit resisted. Beneath the surface, there lived a sharp awareness. She noticed which guards drank too much at night, which doors were left unlocked, which fields led to swamps where a body could vanish. It was not rebellion then, only observation. Yet every detail she gathered stitched itself into her memory like hidden weapons. Those who worked beside her knew they could trust her. In stolen moments around the fire, when voices softened and fear briefly gave way to courage, Clara's opinion mattered. She never shouted, she never demanded. But when she spoke, even in whispers, people listened. What made Clara different was not just her resilience, but her duality. To the masters, she was invisible, a body that worked when commanded. To the enslaved, she was a protector, one who could be relied upon in times of need. She carried children on her hip when mothers collapsed from exhaustion. She stayed awake to tend to wounds inflicted by the lash. She taught younger ones how to mask their pain, how to hold their tongue, how to survive until morning. That care, quiet as it seemed, was rebellion of its own kind, defiance disguised as nurture. But Clara knew that endurance alone could not heal the wounds carved into her people. Each day carried the same truth. Survival was not living. Something would have to change. Though she never confessed it aloud, she carried a silent thought with her. Chains could break, and when they did, she would be ready. Clara had lived with pain all her life, but one night carved a wound so deep it would never close. It was late summer in Savannah, when the heat pressed heavy on the skin and tempers grew short. The plantation had hosted guests that day, men who laughed too loud and drank too much, their boots echoing against the wooden floors while music from fiddles drowned out the cries in the quarters. Clara was ordered inside the main house to serve, her hands carrying trays of wine she would never taste. She moved carefully, knowing one slip could bring punishment. But it was not clumsiness that doomed her, it was her very presence. One of the slaveholders, red-cheeked from drink, caught her wrist as she passed. His grip was rough, his breath heavy with liquor. Clara tried to pull away, but laughter rose around the room. To them, it was amusement. To her, it was humiliation dressed as entertainment. He whispered words meant only for her, words that burned like iron. When she resisted, the slap came swift, loud enough for others to hear, but no one dared intervene. The blow was not the punishment. What followed was worse. Dragged outside into the dark, Clara endured what countless others had endured before her, her cries swallowed by the music that still played inside. That night her body was violated, but worse still was the silence that followed. No one in power cared. No one punished the man. Life carried on as though nothing had happened. When dawn came, Clara returned to the fields. Her face bore no tears, her voice carried no tremor, but something inside her shifted forever. The shame was not hers, it was theirs. She understood then that there would be no justice given, only justice taken. The other women in the quarters saw her walk past with steady eyes, and they knew. They had known that same darkness. Some lowered their heads in sorrow, others touched her arm in quiet solidarity. In that silence, a bond was formed stronger than words. Clara had joined a circle of women whose rage simmered like coals waiting for breath to ignite them. That night, lying on a straw mattress, she whispered a vow to herself. Never again. The chains could bruise her wrists, the whips could tear her skin, but they would never again take her dignity without cost. She promised that one day, whether through fire, blade, or blood, the masters would feel the same terror they had carved into her. It was not a plan yet, only a seed. But seeds grow, even in poisoned soil. And this one would grow into something the masters could never imagine, a storm born from silence, waiting for the moment to strike. Seasons changed, but the weight of chains never did. On the plantation outside Savannah, cruelty deepened with every passing year. A new overseer had arrived, a man named Rutledge, known for his harshness on other estates. Where others demanded labor, he demanded suffering. He carried a whip not only as a tool, but as a promise. To him, discipline was not about order, it was about fear. And fear, he believed, was best sown in blood. Under Rutledge, punishments became spectacle. A late strike of the hoe, a faltering step in the field, a murmur overheard. Each offense met with lashings meant not just for the guilty, but for the eyes of all who watched. Clara stood in those circles more times than she could count, watching flesh split and backs bend. Her stomach turning with rage, she forced to remain hidden. The cruelty was constant, but it was his words that stung sharper than the whip. He would sneer at the workers, calling them animals, reminding them daily that they were property. To Clara, every insult was kindling on a fire already burning inside. The masters, too, added weight to the burden. They celebrated harvests with grand balls, parading wealth before those who bled to create it. Inside the house, chandeliers glowed while music carried into the fields. The enslaved were forced to serve in silence, carrying trays and bowing heads, invisible but ever present. Clara watched those nights carefully, the wine flowing too freely, the men laughing too loud, their judgment clouded by luxury. Each ball was proof of how far apart their worlds stood, one of abundance, the other of starvation. The children on the plantation were not spared. Clara saw boys too young to carry burdens forced into labor, their cries ignored. She saw mothers beg for mercy, only to be pushed aside. Once, she witnessed a child stumble under a load of cotton too heavy for his frame. Instead of help, the overseer struck him across the back. Clara's hands clenched at her sides as the boy fell to his knees. She could do nothing in that moment, but her silence was not surrender. It was memory. Every lash, every insult, every tear, she collected them like stones, waiting to throw them back when the time came. By night in the quarters, whispers grew. The people spoke of their dead, of the ones who had run only to be hunted down, of those who had prayed for deliverance that never came. And in those whispers, Clara felt the shift. No longer was it only her rage, others carried it too. The air grew thick with tension, a storm no one dared name aloud, but all could feel. Every act of cruelty made the silence sharper, heavier, closer to breaking. Clara knew the day was coming when silence would no longer protect them. And when that day arrived, she would not hide, she would lead. The breaking point came on a night heavy with heat and arrogance. The plantation prepared for its grandest celebration yet, the annual ball, a gathering of Savannah's wealthiest slaveholders. Lanterns hung from the oaks, the house filled with music and perfume, while wagons of food and wine arrived as though abundance were endless. For those in chains, it was another night of servitude. Long hours carrying trays, pouring glasses, and bowing before guests who would never see them as human. But for Clara, it became the night when every hidden wound demanded reckoning. She had been ordered to serve near the dining hall. Rutledge, the overseer, lingered close, watching her every movement with that familiar smirk. His presence made the air suffocating. Later that night, when one of the guests, a man notorious for cruelty toward his own slaves, mocked Clara in front of others, Rutledge joined in, his laughter loud, his words sharper than the whip. Then came the shove. Clara stumbled, the silver tray crashing to the floor, wine spilling across the polished boards. The room erupted in laughter, but it was not laughter she would ever forget. It was ridicule, humiliation sharpened to a blade. The punishment was immediate. Rutledge dragged her outside by the arm, his voice promising lashes at dawn. But it was not the threat that burned inside her, it was the look on the faces of those who watched. The guests smirked, the masters sipped their wine. To them, she was entertainment, no different from the music echoing in the hall. Clara realized then that survival had no dignity left. The vow she whispered years ago came rushing back, heavier, louder. Never again. That night, lying on the hard floor of the quarters, her body aching from the rough hands that had shoved her down, Clara stared into the darkness and knew the truth. There would be no tomorrow like today. Something inside her had shifted past return. She could not accept another sunrise where chains dictated her steps and laughter mocked her pain. The time for watching and waiting was over. Others saw it too. The women whispered about the humiliation she endured. The men muttered about the lashings promised at dawn. Their voices carried not only pity, but anger that mirrored her own. For years they had swallowed insults, buried rage, prayed for deliverance that never came. Now they looked to Clara, waiting for a sign, and in that silence the decision was born. No more patience, no more quiet endurance. The masters believed their power eternal, untouchable, celebrated with wine and song. But Clara knew the truth. Power could bleed, and before the next ball ended, it would. The quarters became more than a place of rest. It became a council in the shadows. Clara spoke first, not with fire in her voice, but with calm certainty. "They will not stop," she said, her eyes fixed on the small circle around her. "Every year, every season, it grows worse. If we do nothing, our children will know only chains. But if we act together, we can end this." Her words did not rise in volume, yet they struck deeper than any shout. Around her, faces leaned closer. Anger was already there, smoldering. Clara gave it direction. The first to answer was Isaiah, a field hand whose back bore more scars than unmarked skin. He had lost 2 brothers to the whip, buried without ceremony behind the barn. He clenched his fists as he spoke. "I will not die with my head bowed." His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. Then Miriam, older and weary, added her voice. Years ago, she had seen her daughter sold to a man in Charleston, never to return. She lived only with memory and grief. "If my hands can still hold a blade, then let them be used." Her pain became a weapon. One by one, others joined, each with a story carved by cruelty. Some had lost mothers, others children, some their very will to hope. But in that night, hope returned, not in prayers to the heavens, but in a plan forged by human hands. They counted themselves, 12 in all, each willing to risk life for something greater. Clara reminded them that this was no small act. It was war declared under their very feet. But no one faltered. Each gave their word. The plan was simple, yet daring. On the night of the next plantation ball, while the masters feasted and drowned in wine, the strike would come. The house would be full of their oppressors, men fattened by stolen labor, distracted by music and pride. Servants would be forced to move through every room, trays in hand, making them invisible and close enough to strike. Weapons were scarce, but necessity sharpened their resolve. Hidden tools became blades, axes from the woodpile, knives meant for butchering hogs, even stones wrapped in cloth for crushing blows. Each item was chosen, prepared, hidden where no overseer would search. Before they parted, Clara led them in a vow. No grand ritual, only truth spoken low. "We may not live to see another dawn," she said, "but if we fall, let it be with our heads high, our dignity our own. And if we succeed, let our children know freedom, if only for a breath." The circle repeated her words, their voices hushed but firm, each syllable carrying the weight of centuries of silence broken. That night the conspiracy was sealed. It was no longer whispers. It was destiny. And destiny had chosen the night of laughter, music, and chandeliers to drown in blood. The night of the ball arrived with grandeur. Carriages lined the drive, wheels crunching against gravel as women in silks and men in pressed coats stepped into the plantation house. Candles flickered in every window, music swelled from violins and fiddles, and laughter poured out like wine. To the guests, it was a celebration of power and wealth. To Clara and the others, it was the perfect storm, luxury blinding arrogance, wine loosening vigilance. Inside, the enslaved moved like shadows, unseen and unacknowledged. Trays of roasted meat and goblets of red wine passed from hand to hand. Clara's face betrayed nothing, but beneath her calm gaze, her heart thundered. She watched every corner of the room, every door, every exit. At her side, Isaiah gripped the handle of a serving tray, its weight hiding the butcher's knife strapped beneath. Miriam carried jugs of water, though her hands trembled with the strength of the stone she had hidden inside her apron. The plan pulsed in silence, waiting for the signal. When the midnight toast came, glasses lifted high, Clara's eyes met Isaiah's across the room. It was time. She stepped forward, her voice calm, asking a guest if more wine was desired. As his gaze turned, Isaiah struck. The blade slid fast and sure into the overseer Rutledge's ribs. The man gasped, eyes wide with disbelief, blood staining his coat as the music faltered. For a moment, the hall froze, and then chaos erupted. Screams tore through the air as the enslaved cast off their disguises of servitude. Trays became weapons, knives flashed, fists and fury unleashed years of chained rage. Clara struck next, her knife slashing across the throat of the guest who once humiliated her, his laughter silenced in a spray of crimson. Miriam hurled her stone into the skull of another, the crack echoing louder than the violins. The guests scrambled, some slipping on blood-slick floors, others clawing for weapons or the door. But the rebels were everywhere, coordinated, relentless. Isaiah tore through two men in moments, his blade rising and falling like the harvest scythe. Clara moved with precision, not wild rage but controlled vengeance. Each face she remembered, each cruelty repaid. The chandeliers above swayed as bodies collided, their light casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Music ceased, but the echoes of screams filled the space. Within minutes, 13 men lay broken, their wealth and power spilling lifeless on the very floors they had once danced upon. The women shrieked in terror, fleeing toward the doors, their gowns dragging through blood. But none of the rebels raised a hand against them. This was not their war. When the last of the masters fell, Clara stood in the center of the hall, her chest heaving, her hands red but steady. Silence pressed heavy after the storm of violence, broken only by the moans of the dying. Around her, the others gathered, their faces fierce, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and triumph. The unthinkable had been done. The chains had broken. The ballroom smelled of blood and smoke. The chandeliers still swayed gently, their crystals stained red where splashes had reached them. The 13 men lay scattered, lifeless monuments to arrogance undone. For a moment, the rebels stood in silence, stunned by their own victory. Then Clara spoke, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "This house will never hold power over us again." With those words, the second act began. Isaiah and two others rushed to the kitchen, where flames from the hearth were still alive. They carried torches back into the grand hall, their light dancing across the faces of the living and the dead. Miriam began tearing down velvet curtains, their rich fabric now destined for fuel. One by one, they set fire to the very walls that had confined them, the house that had witnessed centuries of humiliation. The fire caught quickly, greedy and unrelenting. Drapes curled black, wood cracked under the heat, and smoke began to rise toward the ceiling. The rebels moved through the rooms, opening doors to release those still trapped, enslaved children forced into service, the elderly kept in back kitchens. Clara led them out into the night, her hand gripping a torch that lit the path forward. Behind them, the plantation house, once a symbol of dominance, became a furnace of retribution. There was more than destruction, it was cleansing. Each room consumed by flame erased memories of cruelty. Each groan of timber collapsing echoed like freedom's hymn. As the inferno grew, the enslaved gathered outside, their eyes reflecting orange light. Some wept quietly, others fell to their knees in disbelief. Clara stood among them, her face illuminated by fire, and for the first time in her life, she felt no weight pressing her down. She was not bowing, she was standing. The rebels did not linger only for fire. They moved through the barns and the stables, breaking locks, releasing horses and mules. Animals ran free into the night, their cries mingling with the crackle of burning wood. In the fields, they struck at cotton bales, setting them ablaze, symbols of the wealth built on stolen labor reduced to ash. Nothing would remain to remind the world of this plantation's pride. As the roof of the grand house collapsed in a roar, sparks flew high into the dark Savannah sky. The flames could be seen for miles, a beacon to some, a warning to others. To the enslaved, it was both judgment and rebirth. Clara raised her torch high before tossing it into the last unlit corner of the house. "Let them remember this night," she said. "Let them know we are not shadows." The fire consumed everything. What had once been the seat of power was now reduced to ruins glowing in the night. The plantation's rule ended not with negotiation, not with mercy, but with fire and blood. The fire still roared behind them, but Clara's eyes were fixed on the horizon. The house was gone, the masters silenced, yet the night was far from over. The enslaved gathered in the fields, some clutching children, others trembling with shock. What had just happened felt impossible. 13 slaveholders dead, their empire in flames. For a heartbeat, there was silence, the kind that comes after a storm. Then came the first cries, not of fear, but of release. Men and women who had never known a day without chains shouted, wept, clung to one another. For the first time, they were not property. They were people who had struck back. Word spread quickly. In the nearby quarters, where some had been too old or too fearful to join, whispers of the massacre carried like wildfire. Faces once beaten down by hopelessness lifted as they realized the truth. Power was not untouchable. Clara watched as the younger ones, wide-eyed, looked upon her not just as a woman among them, but as something larger, a symbol of defiance. Isaiah stood at her side, his knife still red, his voice loud as he declared, "No more chains, no more silence." The cry was repeated by others, swelling into a chorus that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Yet even in triumph, Clara understood the danger. The night's flames would draw attention. The smoke climbing into the sky was not just a banner of victory. It was a signal to every neighboring plantation, to the patrols, to the city itself. Retaliation would come swiftly and without mercy. The rebels had bought freedom for a night, but not safety. She gathered them together, her voice urgent. "We must move now. Take only what you can carry. If you stay, you die. If you leave, you may live." Groups began to form. Some fled into the swamps, vanishing into the dense marshland where dogs and horses could not easily follow. Others moved toward the woods, where paths led north, carrying rumors of freedom past the rivers and beyond the Mason-Dixon line. Mothers clutched children tight, fathers guided the weak and the elderly. It was chaos, but it was purposeful chaos, movement born of survival. The legend began that very night. By dawn, the story of the Savannah massacre was already whispered miles away. To the enslaved on other plantations, it was a spark, proof that rebellion was possible. To the masters, it was terror, the realization that those they had called powerless could, in one night, shatter everything. The response would be brutal, Clara knew that. Blood would call for blood, but even as fear coiled in her chest, she also felt certainty. Something had changed forever. The house was gone. The masters were gone, and though danger loomed, the name of Savannah would now carry more than wealth and grandeur. It would carry memory of chains broken, of voices risen, of a night when shadows became fire. The dawn over Savannah was not like any other. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the plantation, black against the pale sky, the smell of ash and blood drifting for miles. Soldiers and patrols arrived before noon, rifles in hand, horses restless at the scent of fire. They found only corpses in the ballroom and walls collapsing into embers. Clara and her companions were gone, vanished into the swamps and forests. To the masters, it was unthinkable. The enslaved had not only risen, they had destroyed everything. Panic spread among the planters of Georgia. Fear had entered their parlors and their prayers, but freedom born in blood does not come without pursuit. Militias were formed within hours, hunting parties unleashed with dogs and chains. For days, the swamps echoed with shouts and gunfire. One by one, some rebels were caught, dragged back, and executed as warnings. Their bodies were displayed, hung from trees or burned, so no one would dare follow their path. Yet even in death, whispers grew louder. The people in the fields carried their names like hymns, repeating them in secret until they became legend. Clara's fate was never written in certainty. Some said she was captured weeks later, defiant even as the rope tightened around her neck, refusing to bow in her final breath. Others swore she escaped, carried north through hidden routes, her face remembered by those who helped her along the way. In stories told around fires, she became more than a woman, she became a symbol. To some, she was the one who burned Savannah's pride. To others, she was the spirit of resistance, a shadow that haunted every plantation owner who feared the night. The massacre was buried quickly in official records, erased or softened by those who wanted history to remain silent. But memory is not easily killed. Among the enslaved, the story lived on, passed through whispers, through songs disguised as prayers, through names given to children who would never forget. Each telling was a spark, each memory a weapon sharper than chains. Savannah itself carried the scar, though many tried to hide it. Behind the grand houses and polished streets, there lingered the ghost of that night, not supernatural, but real, carried in the fear of masters and the hope of the enslaved. Clara's vow lived longer than her body. Her promise that chains could break, that power could bleed, became the legacy of Savannah's fields. And though centuries would pass, though her face would fade into the fog of history, the truth remained. The night the chandeliers of the plantation ball fell into fire was the night shadows turned into warriors. The story of Clara and her companions was not only about vengeance, it was about dignity reclaimed, even at the cost of life. And it endures, because memory is the one chain no master has ever been able to break.